Okay, well, thanks a lot for staying on. It amazed me last year that anybody would actually stay after lunch. So this year I wasn't as worried, but it's fantastic to see so many colleagues. On the topic, which perhaps of itself is not extremely sexy. You appreciate? Yeah. I mean, the thing that I want to open with is that I love talking about teaching and assessment in particular, because I believe that if it is done well, which is the subheading of the title for the session, then it can do wonders to the way you work with your learners at different ages, at different levels of competence. Speaking of which, if you've noticed the subheading to the title, then you may have also noticed a certain wording that I have applied. Did you notice that? Right, so I just want to kind of draw your attention to it one more time in case you haven't, because it's the word assessment in particular is one of these words which, you know, we are used to because they are part of everything that we do, almost like a, language teacher's DNA. And yet, I wonder how many of you have noticed that there is another word hidden in that word. Have you? Well, now you have, haven't you? Yeah, this one. And is that a complete coincidence? Well, perhaps not really. Well, perhaps that's one of the reasons why assessment is one of those sort of love-hate phenomena with teachers as well as with learners. Perhaps with teachers for a different reason than it is with learners. Nevertheless, we kind of both feel that you can't do without some form of testing and assessment, but at the same time, we are not immediately thrilled at the prospect of a class test coming up. Am I saying something completely ridiculous? Probably not, if you have been in this business for a while. So my humble plan this afternoon is to move on from this sense of assessment to a different sense of assessment. Thank you, Shrek. Because I think there are all sorts of reasons why we can turn assessment into an act of building relationship, building trust, building a sense of knowing why I am there and why the teacher is my mentor. Okay? So all of this is actually possible provided you deploy a range of interesting techniques. And judging by the feedback from last year, you seem to have liked the techniques last year. If you were here, how many of you were here last year? Wow, okay. So there's gonna be this very soon, okay? That's the plan for about 50 minutes of today. Before that happens, however, I would like to engage you a little bit in confirming that the sort of opening statement is actually correct. So let's do, since we have 500 colleagues in the room, amazing. Yeah, let's do a little joint assessment of traditional assessment. Okay, so we all know what traditional tests are like, what those quizzes are like, what the accompanying features of them are like, how people feel when they have to take them, right? So let's do a quick round of assessment of traditional assessment. Is that okay? How do we do this? Well, first of all, I suggest that you turn to your left or to your right and you check that the person sitting next to you is nice. Just let's make sure that they are okay. Are they all right? There's no much chance of moving, yeah, but still. All right. Are they okay? Look good like a potential partner? All right. So what I would like to do now is with that nice person you've just established is sitting close, I would like you to spend a proverbial minute, thinking all possible reasons why the traditional testing is bad. Okay, why is it like this? From the perspective of a teacher and from the perspective of a learner. What's wrong with traditional testing? Shall I give you one example? Just to kind of, since we are still digesting that wonderful lunch. Okay, so, one reason why tests are bad is simply because, come on, because they cause stress. Okay? They are stressful. Okay? Maybe useful, but they are stressful. Okay? I'll give you a minute. Really interesting. Okay? So turn to that nice person. Any more reasons why traditional tests are not so nice for the teacher and the learner? I'll give you a moment. Okay. Thanks for the lovely noise. Now, having 500 colleagues in the room, there's no way I can possibly do any sort of sensible checking, getting feedback from you guys. So what I suggest we do is just tell me by show of hands whether what you have been talking about with that nice person sitting next to you was anything similar to my reason number 2, for instance. So anybody was talking about this, that tests make learners into certain types, like good learner, bad learner. Yeah? Anybody thought of that? Let's see, by show of hands. Yes, several. Okay, very nice. So that's one reason. How about this one? They make learning into certain chunks. So you do this because it's going to be on a test. Yes? Are you thinking this? Yeah, channel learning, compartmentalized learning. And then, the side effect of this is that once the test is over, so is the material, right? In Polish, there's this wonderful saying, this is specifically for Russell, zdać, zakuć, zapomnieć. You know this one? This means, it rhymes nicely in Polish. It means that you cram it, you take the test, and then you forget. Okay, and that's what, a lot of learners traditionally went by, right? A portion of learning, test, forget it. Yeah, another portion of learning, test, forget it, and so it goes. Yeah? So that is an important reason why that kind of testing is not so good. And there is one more, which is this one. From a teacher's perspective, I can see people nodding immediately. Traditional ones, you need to prepare them. And not only that, you need to also correct those tests, right? Which is, your private time, unpaid. Anybody in that situation? Yeah. Okay. So that's at least those. I'm guessing there were others, were they? Does anybody want to share anything else important? Okay. Okay. Well, nobody else is going to be able to, but yeah.
This is my favorite.
Oh, yes. Okay. So this is one of those classic educational cartoons in which there are different animals, like there's an elephant, a monkey, a snake. Have you seen that? And they all have to take the same test. Right? That's a very important reason, which is that, no matter which ability you're trying to test, then given that people are made up of different ones, you're going to get very unfair results. Thank you for that. Anything else? Yeah, one more. Super. Okay. Absolutely. And, we could go on and on and on, right? But, this is not the point of this session. I would like now to switch into positive mode, okay? Because we are progressive teachers, all right? So let's now put together at least several reasons for why tests are actually good and why it is actually important to talk about it, okay? So any pluses for the tests? Why can't we not live without them? And again, given that there are so many wonderful colleagues in the room, I'm guessing that we have all the reasons somewhere. Let's just check, shall we? Anybody thought of this one? Yes, they check progress, right? Or lack thereof, as the case may be. Okay, so they are good information collectors, put it that way. Okay, how about the second one? They respond to expectations. For instance, in parents. In some cases. Fair? Yeah? There are certain situations, certain school environments where they are expected to be done. Right? Parents might expect them, head teachers might expect them, minister might expect them, all sorts of stakeholders, as they are called nicely. Okay? So they meet certain expectations. Another thing is they motivate to try harder. Anybody thought about that aspect? Again, I see a lot of nodding, very good, okay? And one more that kind of came to my mind very obvious is that they show what to do next, okay? So whether it's with a grade or whether it's with some other form of information that the learner receives, they help you move on and take another step. Does that make sense? Anything else you'd like to add to this straight away? Yes, one more. Maybe I just run up with a microphone so everybody can take advantage. Okay.
It's time efficient. It's time efficient.
What's time efficient?
When you get a test, everybody can be doing it at once, and you don't need to, I don't know, ask every single person for an answer, and then in 45 minutes, an hour, you get a done test.
Okay, yeah. So it's a management tool, yeah? Okay. Of course, then you have to test, then you have to check, and that takes time, but yeah, okay. All right, so that's, in a nutshell, a way of just confirming that, it's a complex type of phenomenon, right? We are not necessarily happy with them, but we feel that there are all sorts of reasons why it will be difficult to live without them altogether. So what I am here to tell you is that perhaps there is a way to have the best of both worlds. That is, keep all the good things of testing without necessarily going for the bad ones. How does that sound to you? And this is what those two images represent. You may have noticed the first one in the opening slide. The reason, I think those images are quite powerful if you think about them. What do they stand for? Well, there's the Swiss Army knife on the left-hand side and a jackknife on the other. What do they stand for? Well, they stand for something rather crucial, which I think applies to testing beautifully. And that is the difference between a tool and a weapon. Okay, notice that in a sense, they are quite similar because they are blades, aren't they? But what you use them for is very different. So my suggestion to you, and this is the big methodology for today, if you like, is that in order to make your assessment smart, you want to make it work as a tool, not as a weapon. What does this mean in practice? In practice, it means that while, of course, we want to give the learners high challenge, and that's what, it's one thing that testing does, right? It pushes you higher. There is no a priori reason why, together with that high challenge, must also come high threat. Am I making sense? So high challenge, yes. But maybe instead of high threat or high risk, that's the weapon metaphor, we could go for low risk or low threat. So the challenge remains high, but no traditional associations with stress, with punishment, with anxiety, okay, with perhaps not being judged fairly, as you said, etc., etc. How does that sound to you? Good methodology? Of course, at a theoretical level, everything is good. Yeah, I mean, you can make all kinds of nice pronouncements like this. Okay, of course, it becomes interesting when you start looking at individual techniques, and that's where the remainder of the session comes in, okay? So what I would like to do now is to give you a range of practical activities divided up into 3 categories to do with how you use testing assessment smartly. Why the categories? Well, I like to keep things simple, so I like to imagine different ways of twisting the traditional testing format. The idea of, you work alone, yeah, you sit more or less straight, you have a piece of paper in front of you, time is being measured, no consulting other sources, you know the drill, right? Just about every single element of this is up for grabs. It can be twisted in a smart way, okay? Which is why I suggest that, as with the Swiss Army knife, there are different sorts of blades. So I suggest to you that we have 3 different categories of smart assessment. The first, that I label what, does not so much mean that we assess something else. We still need to assess grammar and vocabulary and various language skills, etc. But we do not necessarily have to do this using the traditional testing format. there are ways of doing just that, but changing the way it all looks. And I'm about to show you several examples in a moment. Second category is the category how, which is, okay, you keep the traditional testing tool like a piece of paper, but you do something with the rest of the environment, okay? So, the test itself looks normal, but everything else does not. Are you interested in some examples? Okay. And finally, and very importantly, also for those who were here last year, I made a big point last year about how we as teachers work too much. Does anybody remember? Do you feel like you work too much? Or do you feel like you're lazy and you work too little? No, I'm not pulling your leg. I'm being serious. My point last year was that teachers generally work way too much. But I don't mean administration and other things. I mean the fact that we take on, out of good motives, a lot of the roles that in fact should be lumped on the shoulders of the learner. Because it's the learner that should be doing the hard work, not us. I know English, I've studied this for years. Now it's somebody else's turn, okay? So the third category is gonna be who does the assessment, who actually performs the important work and most of it when smart assessment happens. That's the plan. Good one? Shall we start with the what? Okay. So to start with the what, remember, what I am opening this with is the idea of, okay, a test does not have to look like a test, even though it is. Okay? There's no reason why it all has to look like that. Okay? So what can it look like? Well, for instance, it can look like this. You know that, don't you? You've played that complicated game, haven't you? Okay, but have you played this for English and for assessment? Okay, some people are nodding, wonderful, but some people are saying no. All right, so let's see. How would that work? Well, imagine that a student is presented rather than with a traditional looking quiz with those, 9 rectangles, and inside those rectangles, for the sake of argument, we insert something like this. And take a good look, because it's not a mechanical selection. Now, turn to that nice neighbor, remember that nice person sitting next to you, okay? How would you run it as a test? You have this material, that's what it looks like. What would the instruction be? How would you actually do it? Let's see. Give yourself a chance to be creative. I love that quote you have got on your t-shirts, by the way, the one that says that the best way to create a future, what was it? The best way to predict the future is to create it. So let's create it. Let's create a future of assessment together, which is an alternative future. Okay? How would you run it as a test? What does the learner or do the learners need to do? Anybody? I can see lots of interesting, finger moving. Yeah. Kuba, we should be taking photographs because I just love what's happening at the moment. So would you please do this for me? Okay. Okay, so one quick idea to set us off would be, for instance, to say, all right, so you work in pairs, okay, and your task, of course, is to play the regular noughts and crosses, but in order to put your symbol in, you need to form a correct sentence using the item that you see. Does it make sense? Yeah? And whoever is first, working out a line, wins that round of assessment. Does that make sense? Okay. Does it only work for, basic level, present simple, tense parts of speech? No, it doesn't. Look. Yeah. Correct? I think it gets better as the learners get more advanced, because then you can easily, with this, what could the task be? several different tasks, actually, right? The task could be, for instance, translate, find a synonym, find an antonym, use in a sentence. The important thing is the students take those items one by one, and they give you all kinds of information in exchange, do they not? Notice how much you learn by just listening to what's going on and what is not going on. Because, of course, there's a question of who gets the grade and when. We'll come to that in a moment. But I hope that you see that rather than focusing on, how people get graded, we are focusing on how much they are learning together. Okay? Another example, I said that it gets more interesting as learners get more advanced. Look at this one, for instance. These are all examples taken from other teachers' attempts to implement this. Nice? And again, I hope you can see now that, if you have a range of different items coming from different tenses, things become a lot more interesting, right? You could be building sentences in different tenses. You could be paraphrasing. You could be doing all sorts of otherwise very, very useful tasks to do with processing information using this as a fixed selection of items so that there is also a clear outcome. You know which of the two, if they are working in pairs, which of the two is actually ending up with a complete line or diagonal or whatever. Okay? And the thing that I want to amplify here is that, when you look at such techniques sort of just based on a couple of isolated examples, they might look like something which is it's a nice enough wow factor lesson, but really for, every day I will go back to normal, so to speak. So I want to persuade you that in fact such things are best, or at their best, when as their starting point you take something which is currently on your agenda anyway. So take, for instance, this is a complete illustrative example, right? Nothing that I'm pushing on you here specifically. All I'm trying to say is that, you are working with this particular page in a course book, and on that page, you happen to find this segment. I know it's small, I'm just showing you that it's there, okay? And then you are saying to the students, look, you have got not 9, but a lot more items. So the first question to you and to the learner will be, who is deciding on which items go into the 9 spaces? And of course the answer is, it's the students that decide by looking at this list and processing this list so that the selection process starts. And notice that the very act of the student having to choose something is the first round of revision. If you were with me last year, then you know that I am a great fan of revision and I offered all kinds of techniques of revision. So what I'm saying now is that you want this as the starting point of the process of learning before they even start testing each other. You see what I mean? Another upshot of this is that if you run it on the principle that the student gets a blank page of noughts and crosses and needs first to choose what goes into the noughts and crosses for another student or pair of students to do, also means that you end up with a whole range of different versions of this activity based on the same material, which is rather wonderful, isn't it? And as this is all happening, what does the teacher do? Well, yeah, supervisor's all right, but essentially, and this is important, the teacher does very little. Okay? And that's what I want to amplify. The teacher is not busy deciding on which items go where. You see, not in that private time. All you need to do, if anything, is to distribute some blank sheets with the 9 squares in them, okay? And then the rest of the process is almost taking care of itself. Yes, of course you are supervising, but it's nice to be able to stand back and supervise, then do this in your private time while the students are playing computer games. Am I making sense? So this is just one idea. You don't have to like it. I'm giving you a range of alternatives. I hope that some of them will tick. Okay. Second idea is something that I showed last year. So if you were here, then I hope you will recognize it, but it fits so well that I couldn't help myself. Okay, it is, in this version, it is called a word formation haircut. Okay, how does this work? Well, as you can see, there is an image, rather powerful, with those spiky hair sticking out all over. What's the language on the spikes? Well, as the name suggests, here, it's to do with word formation. Can anybody see any of the items? They are quite small, but I hope that at least people sitting closer can recognize them. So what's the content of those spikes? Those are complex nouns with suffixes, yeah? Okay, so how does the testing go? How is it used as a testing tool, this picture? Well, if you know where the suffix begins, then you are able to produce this. Correct? Yeah, it's very visible, crystal clear whether it's correct or not, so the feedback is instantaneous. Okay? Nice? Okay, now the question is, again, who does the hard work? Because you might say, well, all right, but with this one, in order to produce an image like this with all these spiky hairs, then the teacher needs to do quite a lot of work. And the answer is yes, he or she does, but only for demonstration purposes. Okay? It's a technique. And I call this a word formation haircut, but in fact, it's any word combination haircut, if you think about this way. Okay? I'll give you an example. Look, for instance, at this sort of collection that I am, again, lifting directly off a course book. And you know why? Because I do not want this to be completely unrelated to what is going on your lesson plan. On the contrary, I am thinking that this will be a very important feature that you will use when the time comes to revise and consolidate this particular selection of vocabulary, right? So when you see it in your course book, then one way to activate it would be, okay, so now you work in pairs and you produce instances of such word formation haircuts for other learners to use. Does it make sense? Would you be able to do it, you think? And notice if you start down this route, there is no stopping you really, because look, for instance, at that sort of selection of material. This is not suffixes. This happens to be phrasal verbs connected with travel. Look at that, a whole load of wonderful language. Now, how about putting the verbs and the adverbial particles on a single hair, so that, again, you need to, of course, then you would play it the other way around, right? You would first have a folded haircut, and you can only unfold it if you know which suffix is appropriate. Nice? Or which adverbial particle is appropriate. Nice? Who does the selection? Well, again, originally, the teacher, so that the student understands what the hell it is that it is expected. But for any subsequent iteration, of course, it should be the learner's choosing. So, as with all of those other activities, the basis is the material you have covered. They need to go and perform the hard work of selecting so that other learners can take advantage. What do you do while all of this is going on? I keep reminding you because it's important. Yeah, you are doing absolutely nothing, or just about. Okay? So it's not the teacher devising and correcting those tests, it's the students devising and then getting feedback of each other so that you can do a lot less and they can learn a lot more. Again, if you don't like this one, perhaps you will be more enticed to try this one. Okay? Notice that the actual content of the slips of paper could be pretty much traditional test, except it's all divided up. There is this dividing wall. A colleague here says that they use pizza boxes for that, which I think is a lovely recycling idea. Okay, if you have enough space on the desks, it could well be, you just use the cover of the lid of the pizza box, and it produces the teaching tool, the testing tool itself. But what is really sweet is that, again, the content that goes on is the doing of the student based on what it is that the student has covered over the past few classes. What could that be? Well, let's again take an example. You have a page of a course book for illustrative purposes, and on that page you select a question like this. It's a speaking activity, as it happens, because, of course, it's not just a question of alternative assessment of grammar and vocabulary, right? So in this case, it says, interview your partner using these questions. But notice, if the questions go onto the slips of paper and the students are sitting against each other and they get to choose which questions get asked in what sequence, it becomes a natural testing activity. Nice? Another example, again, I'm just, using stuff that as I've been flipping through one particular course book, I thought, gosh, they are staring at me left, right, and center as long as I switch that mindset. So, something like this. Look at the example, then one of you says a sentence and the other agrees using a synonym. What a great activity for that sort of thing, right? You are just having a selection of items. One student picks a piece of paper, reads out the sentence, and the other needs to react instantly with the synonym. The teacher, if anything, again, I will use your word, supervises, maybe ticks, on a list how many they've done right, but other than that, nothing in terms of teacher involvement. Okay? So these are just several ideas on this topic of how we could change the testing format so that while the assessment is going on, and very well, the associated stress goes and the teacher involvement decreases. Okay? What I always say in a situation like this is that if you like any of this, then by no means should you stop here. Those are just 3 examples to suggest a way to go. And the over to you is not something that we can usefully do here with 500 people in the room, but when you get the slides, and you will, I will send them all to English books so they can distribute to you, okay? When you see this slide, it's an invitation to start collecting your own examples, building a repertoire of different techniques. Like I have, I'm like a sponge. I just, collect good ideas, as you can see, from social media and others, okay? So that you have a whole range of things that you can do so that the learner does not get bored with one particular form, but can go on from one to the next, and you can spread it out across the program rather well. The second area is this how segment. In other words, activities which take the traditional form of the test and they keep it. It can be a piece of paper, but something changes to the environment, and therefore it becomes a different experience for everybody concerned. Again, I have, I think, 3 different examples. So the first example is called the Minesweeper. How does the Minesweeper go? Well, Minesweeper is a really useful universal technique. You present the learners with a pretty much standard quiz or class test with, a range of activities on it. A normal one, like a progress test, you could print, from your course materials. You don't have to do anything at all. The choice of content is not important here, okay? From the perspective of the technique. So what's the Minesweeper? Well, the idea is this. First of all, students work on this individually. Okay? This phase is not obligatory, but most of the teachers who've tried this technique say that it's good if a student has got a moment to go over the material himself or herself for a few minutes. Okay? So they work on the tasks individually. But the Minesweeper technique begins when this original phase is over, and then they start working in pairs or small groups. And in pairs or small groups, they need to compare and comment on whatever answers they've provided so that they agree on something for each item. Okay? So if somebody chose past simple and somebody else has chosen present perfect, they have to agree whether it's present perfect or past simple. Do we, yep, okay? So that's the important one. They have to have a common answer to each item. Okay. When this is done, the teacher starts calling out in pretty much random order across the room, okay, one person from each pair or group of 3 for each task, just one, okay? And that person is the one who happens to be the Minesweeper, because they have to provide the answer, and this is the important moment, when they provide the answer, that answer counts for the whole class. Okay? If it's wrong, it's like with the mines, well, sorry, yeah, accident. But if it's correct, it counts for the whole class. It adds this element of, I am not necessarily 100% responsible, it's partly fate, but notice, as this is happening, they are all revising the material. And when this one is over, the teacher then says, okay, the tasks are provided, the teacher is counting up the answers, and the teacher, remember again, only takes into consideration the answer provided by that person, nobody else, okay? And finally, the teacher adds up the answers from the class, and an interesting little spin-off, which is that, let's say, if the total is about 85%, there's no so-called real test that follows, okay? You might say, well, is this entirely fair? I don't know. It changes the environment. It gives them a different way of processing that particular material. So if your mindset is such that you are not so much interested in grading them, but you're a lot more interested in giving them a reason to process the material, then, according to a lot of the teachers who've tried this technique, it's a nice enough alternative. Okay? And the fact that they become minesweepers at random, more or less, means that, yes, it can be your responsibility or it can be somebody else's responsibility. It adds an element of unpredictability to the whole procedure. But there is also this bonus, which means that, from the learner's perspective, it makes sense to get involved because you may be contributing to the reward, which then is the reward for the whole group. Okay. So that was the technique. And if you're thinking, well, what material? Well, I hope you won't be surprised if I say, well, the material, of course, is something that you would normally be expecting them to do because they are at the end of a unit of work. So it could be a revision page from the book, it could be a consolidation progress test from the course materials, anything that you would normally use for a traditional test. Yes, a third one in that category, and probably one of my favorite in this collection, is called revision work tables. Notice the plural, work tables. This is important for this technique. And the way it works is this. Imagine, again, for the sake of argument, that you have got a revision page for them to cover. And in a normal situation, they would sit on it and perhaps they would then need to count the points out of a certain number, etc., etc. We all know the drill. But the work tables technique is such that instead of that doing this, sitting behind desks and worrying about whether they get the requisite number of points or not, you tell them, you work in pairs today, not on your own, and you are not sitting at all, you are moving from one workstation to another across the classroom, okay? So the way you would run this logistically is, first of all, let's imagine a sort of mental cutting up of the material into, in this case, 4 workstations. Okay? Each workstation contains one activity. Okay? What happens next? They get physically spaced around the room. Okay? So you use 4 different desks in the classroom. Each of them has got a pile of sheets containing one activity only. And the students in those pairs need to move in any order, in any sequence, and do all the activities which are positioned on those workstations, okay? Until all the pairs are ready with all the tasks. Make sense? Interestingly, you can also build, this is feedback from colleagues, you can build in an element of competition. So the pair that manages to cover all the 4 workstations in this particular case wins that particular race and wins the whole game. Not necessary, but possible. Who would that be good for? Well, certainly all the people who are so-called kinesthetic learners, right? And they really need to move in order to stay concentrated. Okay? Notice that they are essentially doing the same tasks. I'm showing you a page from the book, but it could also be a black and white progress test taken directly from the book that you carve up and do it. Okay? The important thing is the movement and the random sequence in which they are doing the tasks. Of course, they are also working in pairs, so it's up to you and the group to decide if they are also sharing the grade. If the grade is at stake, yeah? But something which you can easily build into the whole procedure. Okay. Another favorite of mine, something which learners find very surprising, and the fact that learners find very surprising, to me, is proof that something really interesting is going on. It's called extras from the learners. How does this one go? Okay, well, imagine again a standard test, grammar test, vocabulary test, where they have to respond to a certain number of items. I'll give you a few examples in a moment. The word extra comes from the following. You tell the learner that when they do a particular exercise on a test, they are allowed to add a certain number of extra items, let's say 2, to each of those exercises if they can think of another example or item that they know, but it simply didn't happen to be tested in this particular exercise. Would you like to see an example? It could be very simple. It's not the material that matters. Look, something like this, grammar in context. Okay, imagine that kind of activity. Write 1 true sentence about yourself for words 1 to 6. Use the present perfect simple. And you have got 6 different items. Never, yet, already, for, since, and just. Can the student not think of a different word that's also an adverbial of time? Possible? Well, like, for instance, yeah, or sometimes. Yeah? So if you can think of a different item and also build a sentence, it counts as much as any of the ones that are tested. That's a little surprising, isn't it? And you know what? The learners, if you first give them that kind of activity, they tend to be confused. They don't know what to do. And I think this is really interesting because it shows that the learner is so much used by default to being tested and perhaps even caught out. You see what I mean? Yeah? Oh gosh, I know everything else but this, and this is precisely the one that they asked. Okay? So you are reversing this. You are saying, but if you, let's take another example. Look at this one. Developing vocabulary. Write a synonym or partial synonym for words 1 to 10 or whatever. And you look at the words and you might think, gosh, I don't know immature. Yeah? But I know other adjectives in that category which I could show. So isn't it nice if you tell the learner, I am interested or just as interested in what you also know and not just what I happen to be testing you. Make sense? And another one, look, the reason why I'm showing you several different examples is to persuade you that it really is not something you would only do once a semester. It could be something which you build almost into the contract with your learners. Okay, so they understand that you are interested in finding out as much as they know, you see what I mean? And that's what you really assess, rather than simply a more or less accidental selection of items that you have chosen, or the book has chosen, or the author of the test has chosen. Does that make sense to you? So the third one, write down 3 words for each category. Well, maybe I can't think of 3 words for category 3, but I can think of another category in English, you see. So write that category name and then try to find examples for that category. Does it make sense? So you're testing the most that the learner knows rather than a random selection. Okay. And that's what's called extras from the learner. Okay. Over to you. Remember, like with the previous one, if you think this is a fruitful way to investigate things, then I really hope that it will be only the beginning of your journey. Right? And then you will start collecting good examples so that over time you will build a repertoire. Maybe you will use other colleagues as well for that. These days it's so much easier than it used to be. The last segment that I would like to share with you is this idea of who is responsible for the assessment, for the production of the material, and sometimes even for the administration of it. I already alluded to it in several different moments as we went along, but I want to show you some techniques which are specifically built from that perspective in mind. The first of these is the left to right and back again. Left to right and back again. What does this mean? Well, again, let's take an example. Imagine that you've come towards the end of a unit of work, and the students have got this page or a spread of items to work on. You tell them first that in the pairs, I think it shouldn't be more than pairs because it will become messy. So in their pairs, they should look over all of this material and themselves produce, for instance, one test exercise for another pair. Okay? Of course, you need to give them an example, as always. So if it is, for instance, a translation exercise, you will tell them, here is a sample item. Now you look over all of this and choose 10 such items for another pair. Okay? You write them on a piece of paper. Once it's ready, it should take about 5 to 10 minutes, according to the people who've done it, okay, with a standard pre-intermediate-ish group. Okay? Once it's done, then it's the left to right. So then the ones that have got it, give the sheets to the pair sitting to the left. Okay? And the pair sitting to the left needs to look over all of those examples and try to do the traditional test. Okay? What about the back again? Well, after the next 5 minutes when they have all done it, it goes back to the original authors. Okay? Why? Because, of course, the authors, being authors, should know what they have chosen and why. Okay, so now the authors have to go through the answers, check, and give feedback to the ones that used to be on the left. What does the teacher do? My favorite tune, right? Well, the teacher is sipping a non-alcoholic drink, right? And watching all of this, maybe giving advice. If they say, teacher, but I'm not sure, well, that's what that's precisely when you're useful. That's where you want to intervene and maybe help out, maybe say, no, that's not a good example. That's where you work. That's where you teach, okay? But the rest of the process is up to the learners themselves, okay? So 5 to 10 minutes production, 5 to 10 minutes, but probably a little less to actually solve the puzzle, back to the original creators who need to oversee it and decide whether it's been solved correctly or not. It takes about half a class, that kind of thing, for one standard exercise. All right. Another technique, again, tried and tested, and with, as you can see, relatively young learners, a short piece of text that has been covered as part of the normal teaching of that unit of work. Okay? You tell the learner that their task is to simply take correcting fluid and cover up, let's say, 5 items in the text so that other students can try and guess what the gaps are. In this particular case, something that I photographed because I just thought it was so lovely, it was done with 4th graders. And this little gem of a future teacher, okay, gapped like this. Okay, so this is the result. Take a look. My Pacho, I'm Cuba, etc., etc. This is my birthday present, my family. Football is my favorite. Now, what is really lovely about this is the comment that the kid produced together with the result. And the comment in Polish read like this. I cannot gap Cuba or 11 because they won't be able to solve it. You know, this is super cool. Notice this kid understands how gap fill actually works, if it's a fair gap fill. Notice how much deeper this is from just giving that same learner somebody else's activity without a chance for the learner to reflect like that. And then maybe they do it, maybe they don't do it. You know, if they are a good learner, they probably do it. But even if they solve all the gaps themselves, you would never have heard that kind of comment because you would never have given that learner a chance to reflect upon 2 different types of information. One which is grammatical and recoverable, and another which is completely lexical, content-based, and unrecoverable as a result. Nice? Now, if you like this idea, you're going to like the next one as well, which is this one. I call this learner-produced or student-made worksheets because it does not have to be a single gapped text. It can be a whole worksheet designed by the learner. Take a good look. Have, is it regular or irregular? Buy, is it a verb or a noun? It's a very interesting item, actually. Buy, a verb or a noun? Yeah. Sleep, kojarzy się z, it's a Polish student, so this means is associated with. So sleep associated with bed or with music? Another good one. Okay. Green, what is it? Is it food or is it color? Rice, is it countable or is it uncountable? Bring, it rhymes with sing or with team. That's a very good one. Okay, computer, what do you do with this? Work or ride? Now here, there's an interesting moment. Did she really mean ride or is this a spelling mistake which needs to be addressed? You see? Okay? You wouldn't have known that there may be an issue until they produce it. Okay, another one. Photo. It's a synonym of, what is it? Yes. Or camera. Another great example, actually. All right? Now, where do these categories come from? Is the student so good that they are able to come up with those categories? No. The categories, of course, must come from the teacher. So you tell them, you need to design a worksheet in which one word needs to be rhymes with something. Yeah? So you give them a template. One has to be, is associated with. Okay? So as any of those techniques, it requires a lot of learner training. And that's where the best teacher is at her or his best. But once it's done, notice the amount of processing of information that must go into the student producing that sort of thing, compared to someone simply ticking it off and solving it right or wrong, as the case may be. Am I making sense to you? It's absolutely amazing. And if you're thinking, okay, but that's just a single template, but you know, there's no end to the number of template types that you can give the student. I'll give you a couple more examples. Look at this one, for instance. A puzzle. Okay, a puzzle. And there are 6 questions to the puzzle. The first one is noun, 3 letters, a synonym of mug, rhymes with rap of tea can break. What is it? It's cup, isn't it? It's cup. But notice, the answer to this puzzle, in a sense, is the least interesting part of the whole thing, isn't it? Well, either you know that it's cup or you don't. But if you have to produce those 6 different ways to understand the word cup, then how much intensive cognitive work is going on in the little head? And I wonder if you've noticed, I am told that the laser will not work here, but if you look at item 3 with a good teacherly eye, did you notice that there is a sort of hesitation over the word mug? Yeah, there was a different word, then there was corrective fluid being used. Okay, so some effort, extra effort went into, is it actually mug? It's information for me, okay? It may be an area which is worth revising with that learner anyway. Another great one is, did you notice, I'm sure you've noticed, that item 4 is controversial, isn't it? Because in fact, cup doesn't rhyme with rap. But notice the fact that the student is producing an item like this means I can be useful now, because I have a mini pronunciation lesson to do with that particular learner, right? How else would I know that? You see, if you only give the learner somebody else's test, you will never find out this much. And can I say it one more time, risking being really boring? You know, how much time will it take an average student, of the appropriate age group to produce that sort of puzzle? Well, the answer is quite a lot. Okay. How much time would it take a normal student to answer that puzzle? A split second, yeah? Either they know it or they don't know it, yeah. So when the student is busy designing the puzzle, what does the teacher do? Okay, you know the answer to this. All right. And if you are thinking, well, those are relatively childish examples, they could be, but there is nothing that stops you from extending that technique almost all the way up, to school leaving exams at maturity level, etc., right? Except the tasks will become more in-depth. Some of these we have collected on this slide, taking them directly from exam rubrics. Where they have make a list not, but for instance, translate into. Partial translation is one of the school leaving tasks on Polish state exams, okay? Translate into, give a synonym or the opposite, use in a sentence. It could also be paraphrase, etc., okay? The list is up to you, depending on what tasks you actually want to practice with them. What matters is that the hard labor is with the student and not with you guys. And one more, which, how am I doing for time? All right, yeah. This one is something that I have tried many a time, and I grew to absolutely love this. It's called group accumulation. It works for just about any teenager and above, at pre-intermediate level and above, for language learning and any other subject, actually. And the technique is this. When you are drawing close to a bigger test, like, for instance, a progress test at the end of a semester, and, you want to revise a larger segment of work, not the, remember, the zdaj, zakuj, zapomnij, not just, lump of information, forget about it, right, once it got tested. No, you want students to mentally go back over a larger period of time and more information within that period. What I started doing with a lot of learners is the following. I don't prepare the final test ever, and I certainly don't use a ready-made test. What I do instead is I tell students first which material they need to cover. So it could, for instance, be the last 3 or the last 6 revision pages from that course. That's your material, okay? You need to go over this material at home, in your own time, and based on this material, you need to produce a certain number of items that could be used in a test. You know, like for instance, translate, fill in the gap with the form of a verb. You know, you give them, again, a template where they know exactly which tasks it is. It could be 3, it could be 4. There shouldn't be too many different tasks because they get confused. I'd say about 3, 4 at the maximum, with a very clear example of each, so they understand what to do. They go home, they go over all of this material, and they produce, say, 5 examples of each task. Okay? This is the preparation phase, phase 1. Then comes something really sweet, which is that you tell them, great, you need to bring the sheets with those examples or send them to me electronically if the age group is appropriate. And once you receive all of this, a crucial moment, which is you just put everything on one gigantic document. Okay? You don't edit, you don't subdivide, you don't do any work beyond just collating them and producing a long, long revision document. Okay? Can you guess what happens next? You give the whole document back to the group. And you tell them, look, you've produced this collectively. That's all that I am going to use on that final test. Okay? You do whatever you want with this list. I am not going to intervene. All I am going to do on the test day is I'm going to choose 5 examples from exercise 1, 5 examples from exercise 2, but those are all the examples that you have produced. If I am naughty, then sometimes I also leave the names of the authors of those items on that big document. Okay? So I tell them, if you want to consult Marysia about that item, feel free. Okay, talk to Marysia. I am very happy if Marysia gives you advice on a particular item or set of items. Okay, so I give them, appropriate time to go over that list, and then I do the regular test. For real. Okay. Interestingly, this is what a lot of the colleagues that have tried this technique also say is a great idea. I still tell them at the end that they can skip 1 item or 2 items of the final 20, and they can still get the top grade, okay? So essentially you're telling them, look, all I want you to do is genuinely revise this material at least 3 times by the time the test day comes. And you can probably guess what the end result is. Yeah? If you do it like this, it's very difficult not to get a good grade in that test. And to me, it's one of the greatest moments where I tell them, look, my job has never been to catch you out. My job has always been to show you ways to approach this material as many times as you can so that you actually learn it. And the act of testing is only a little bit of administrative necessity, yeah, which we may, on some conditions, skip, as you recall from some of the previous exercises. All right? So the time is more or less up. So I just want to repeat that again, if you like that kind of technique, moving responsibility onto the learner's shoulders, the best thing you can do for yourselves is to collect more examples. Yeah, I gave you 3 or 4. Try to collect some more. Because this then becomes a tool that can really be used throughout the program. Okay, so the only thing that's left, since I am a teacher and I believe in revision and testing, is a final test, right? Okay, so let's do a final test. And I'm going to use one of my activities, okay, because that's what I preached, okay? So what I would like you to do now is the following. I'm going to show you what I have done, okay? Namely, the photographs, the symbols that stood for 9 activities. Okay, and I want you to turn to that nice person one more time and check if you can reproduce all 9, right? Check whether you understand what the pictures stand for, essentially. Those were the 9. Okay? So turn to the neighbor and just mentally go over them. Do you know what the pictures stand for? What activities there were? How is it going? All 9? Okay. Of course, you will get them all on the handouts. Yeah, there will be slides turned into a PDF at the end, which I will send on to Richard so we can pass on those slides to you. Please do not post them on websites or things, but if you want to circulate them to a colleague, I'm more than pleased if you can do this, right? But I also thought you'd probably deserve a record of that because there's been quite a lot of material in the last 60 minutes, okay? So to say goodbye, I just want to tell you one more thing about assessment and testing, which I think is really incredible. And this is the following. The word assessment, the very word, apart from the us in it that we talked about initially, right? Do you know what the connection is between the word assessment and the word bench? It's interesting. It's the Latin origin of assessment. Yeah, it comes from Latin, and in Latin, the root means assidere, which in Latin means to sit beside. To sit beside. So the essence of assessment is not control, it's not even this, feedback, but it's just being there with the learner. Huh? And I hope that the 9 techniques I showed you today contribute to that sort of role, where, remember, you are not the boss of the material, you are guiding them to select and then process the material either themselves or with somebody else, or maybe with a few people around them, but generally doing this while you monitor, supervise, yeah? Or perhaps in the best of times, you actually do very little because you observe other people's learning in action. And that's my final wish for you. Thank you very much for being with me today. Wow! Thank you ever so much. I just want to finish off by saying that, when I said that I am like a sponge and I collect ideas, I mean it. And in fact, I mean it so much that I am very happy to tell you that a lot of the ideas that I've shared with you today come from some other wonderful colleagues and presentations that I've been able to either help develop or supervise. So this is all collective wisdom, and that's why, I think it's important, isn't it? Yeah. Collective wisdom, which is why this over to you was for real, okay? I mean, I think we are at our strongest as a profession when we can share like that, rather than invent the wheel and reinvent it ourselves all the time, okay? Again, it's unnecessary work, okay? Thank you very much. And if you want to stay in touch, my email address at the top, or not the top, at the bottom of the slide. And the slides I will pass on to Richard as promised without you doing anything at all. All right, thank you very much once again. Enjoy the rest of the evening.
Is it off or on?
It's on.